Today's title, the title of our message today is The Bitter Pill. I was telling my kids last night, or even this morning, kids, I need your 101 attention, simply because the topic that we'll be discussing today is very difficult. And to say, kind of controversial. It's a topic, it's controversial simply because it's not being taught, because it's so controversial. But our passage goes through it, and I felt that, honestly, 2 days ago, I was contemplating to skip verses. I want to prepare more for the topic. But, God said, no, press on with the passage. So, fasten your seatbelts, because it's gonna be a bumpy ride. And I just want to say that when I study the Bible, I just try to teach it as it comes. That's all I can say on the passage. So the title of the message is The Bitter Pill. And I entitled it that way because it's a bitter pill. It's a truth that's so hard to accept. And that truth is about God's sovereignty. Everybody talks about, God is sovereign, we believe in His sovereignty. But do they really realize what that means? That God is sovereign. He has all the rights to rule and reign. And no one can question Him, and no one should question Him. And I think, on the one hand, we say, yes, God is sovereign, we accept it. But when we look into the sovereignty of God, its theology, it's nerve-wracking. And some people, I felt, try to tiptoe around it. But to me, it's so clear. And I hope, as I try to explain the passage, you would see it the way I saw it. Go to Genesis chapter 25, and we're looking at verse 19. And it goes, now this is the record of the generation of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Paddan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Aramean, to be his wife. 21. Isaac prayed to the Lord on the behalf of the wife because she was barren, and the Lord answered him, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. It's hard to put our mind to this, that we saw a few weeks back that Rebekah was the chosen wife of Isaac. Abraham told the servant to, come on, get a wife for my son, and these are the qualifications. And the servant made an oracle that if the girl who approaches them offers water not only to them, but also to the camels, 10 camels, that would mean she would be the one. And they got Rebekah to be the wife. But you would think that if it was God's plan to make Rebekah the wife in order to promulgate the nations, then why is she barren? Lord, I prayed to you. Lord, I heard what you said. Lord, I obeyed. But Lord, why is she barren? It's a hard thing, right? Then I can imagine the servant. Isaac asking the servant, did you really? Is this really the girl? Because if she was really the girl who will help me promulgate our race, why is she barren? And if I was the servant, I don't know what I'd say. Sir, she is the girl. I prayed to God and she said, she's the one. And I realized something. That sometimes life is such. We pray to God, God answers our prayer, and yet the situation is bleak. But that bleak situation is designed by God. Because she was the one. The plan of God, I realize, is always laced with faith-stretching conditions. It's always laced because without faith, you cannot please God. Without faith, we cannot know God. We cannot experience God. And when we read here, right? Isaac prayed to God, and what happened? Rebekah conceived. But did you realize that from the time he prayed to the time he conceived was 20 years? Because it says there, Isaac was 40, in verse 26, he was 60 when the kids were born. We don't see that if you just read it plainly. It's as if he prayed now, and soon after she was pregnant. No. Soon after, 20 years after, she became pregnant and conceived. You know, Christian life really depends on God. Not human striving, not by our own efforts, but on God's work, on God's provisions. Interesting, Abraham prayed a lot. We know that. He built a lot of altars. Wherever he goes, he built and built and built and prayed and prayed. And guess what? His servant was the same. We saw that. And now, in one verse, we realize even Isaac the son was prayerful. Took 20 years before God answered the prayer. And we never saw Isaac complaining. It's as if it was just a run in the mill for Isaac. He prayed, and true enough, Rebekah conceived. You know, we have to realize the promises of God will never be in jeopardy. Never. The plans of God is sure. Time does not weaken the promise and the fulfillment of God's plans. It might cause doubt in us. It might cause anxiety. But that doesn't change the fact. Our anxiety and our anxiety does not diminish the faithfulness of God. 20 years means nothing. Verse 22. But the children struggled together within her. Now she's conceived, right? And she said, if this is so, why then am I this way? So she went to inquire of the Lord. So we see here, Rebekah conceiving, becoming pregnant. Her tummy was becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. That's not unusual, right? For any pregnant woman. But what makes this unusual is that there was a struggle in her tummy. So unusual that she took note of it, because the word struggle there is a very rough word. It means smashing themselves, crushing. This was not a typical kick in the tummy of a baby. They were smashing each other. And the act, the verb there, it was reciprocal. Both babies were smashing at each other. And Rebekah is saying, wow, this is so painful. They're not just pushing each other. I can feel a hit in my tummy. And that conflict between the babies inside will progress. From the womb to the delivery, to the different professions that they had, to the preference of the parents. It's opposite. So what does he do? What does Rebecca do? She inquired to God. She prayed to God. God, what is going on? Why is this happening to me? The crushing, the struggle with the tummy was so painful. It was an anguish question. Why is this happening to me? It's so painful. They're fighting. I wait for 20 years and this is the pregnancy. And some commentators, they say it was so painful, she wanted to die. It was that painful, according to some commentators, given the words that was used. It was not an easy pregnancy. The word there was laced with despair. Verse 23. The Lord said to her, she inquired, Lord, what's going on here? And God replied, 2 nations are in your womb. The 2 people will be separated from your body. One shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger. God explains what's happening there. That the 2 babies signifies 2 nations. Nothing big about that. That one will be greater than the other. That's fine. But the older will serve the younger. That is taboo. Never in the history of Jews, in their culture and tradition, will the younger serve the older. There's a pecking order in their system. That the younger will serve the older. That's why the older gets what? Double the portions of inheritance. Like the kings, right? We saw a wedding last night, right? It's normally the eldest son, eventually, that will become king, not the youngest son. So in the Jewish tradition, this statement was taboo. And imagine if you're Rebecca, you waited for 20 years to be pregnant and you find out from God Himself that your sons will quarrel. What? You know, I hate that. If you have kids and they always fight, pwede ba? Can you stop fighting? And this is God saying it. In fact, the Jews had a hard time. The Jewish rabbis, when trying to explain this verse, couldn't explain it. So they had a theory to justify what happened. Because eventually, who inherited? Jacob, right? And they said, they justified it in their midrash, their book. They said, in reality, it was Jacob that was first fertilized in the tummy. That was their rationalization. Because they cannot accept that Jacob will be served by Esau. But that's what God said. So the josting that was happening in the tummy is a foretaste of the struggles between these 2 brothers. People would ask, how would God fulfill His promise of promulgating the line of Abraham when both brothers are bent in killing each other? How can they be the light of the world when all And what people will see was always infighting.